The HOA cop sailed through the air like a dramatic reenactment of justice itself, arms flailing, clipboard in hand, tie fluttering like a heroic cape, until gravity reminded him he was no superhero. He crashed down on the other side of the 6-foot gate with a grunt and a crunch that could have been his dignity or his knee. Operation Order and Fence, as he proudly named it in his daily log, had officially begun. And 10 feet away, in the shade of a lemon tree, a massive, horned beast named Tank watched with a slow, chilling snort, one that sounded eerily like laughter. Brent Malloy always thought he was destined for greatness. Not greatness like curing cancer or negotiating peace treaties, but greatness in the neighborhood rulebook kind of way. Brent was a man of codes, clauses, and carefully measured lawns. As the senior enforcer of Willow Creek's Homeowners Association, he took his unpaid, volunteer job with a level of seriousness that made actual police officers uncomfortable. His vest had 12 patches, none of them official, and all self-awarded. Vermin Protocol Specialist. Deck Paint Compliance Leader. Chief Surveillance Consultant. Brent didn't need backup. He needed a crowd to appreciate him, which is why this morning was so important. House number 47B had violated Code 16C. Unauthorized lawn structures exceeding ornamental standards. The structure in question? A vaguely threatening statue of what looked like a half-goat, half-robot monstrosity made of rusted tools and rebar, perched proudly in the middle of Eddie Salazar's front yard. Brent had warned Eddie with 3 pink notices. When those went unanswered, Brent prepared to make an example. Problem was, Eddie had a 6-foot wrought iron gate and an intercom system that conveniently never worked when Brent arrived. He tried knocking, buzzing, even faking a UPS delivery once. No response. But today Brent had a plan. The element of surprise. The moral high ground. And a GoPro clip to his vest to document what he anticipated would be an award-winning takedown. What he hadn't anticipated was the animal. Brent didn't see Tank right away. First came the scent, a mix of hay, musk, and something metallic. Then the slow, deliberate clack of hooves against concrete. Brent turned toward the sound just as a shadow moved across the lawn. Standing broad and statuesque in the sunlight was a ram unlike any Brent had ever seen. Thick-horned, muscular, and was that a tactical vest? Tank stared with unblinking eyes. Brent stared back, unsure if he should hold out his badge or a granola bar. The clipboard slipped from his hand. Then Tank charged. It wasn't just speed, it was calculated aggression. The ram's hooves barely touched the grass before Brent let out a sound that no grown man in khakis should ever make. He juked left, sprinted past a flamingo lawn ornament, tripped on a hose, and crashed face-first into a kiddie pool. Water sloshed. Tank stopped short, cocked his head, and then rammed the pool like it had insulted his mother. Brent scrambled to his feet, clutching his soaked citation pad like it was a holy relic. Animal control, he gasped into his walkie-talkie, which wasn't even on. Send backup. Level 4 ungulate hostility. Repeat, the goat is sentient. Tank didn't appreciate being called a goat. Another charge. Brent dove behind a wheelbarrow. The ram headbutted, sending the whole thing flying into a tool shed with a satisfying metallic crash. Brent screamed. Somewhere in the house, a motion sensor beeped. A soft automated voice whispered, "Intrusion detected. Initiating countermeasures." Brent's jaw dropped. Counter what? Sprinklers popped up from the lawn and began to spin wildly, pelting him with cold water and clods of dirt. One sprinkler seemed to follow him. Oh, come on, is this a security system or a boss level? In a blind panic, Brent ducked behind a grill, only for the propane tank to hiss at him ominously. Tank circled like a furry predator from a nature documentary. Brent attempted diplomacy. Nice ram. Strong. Majestic. Possibly overqualified for a backyard. Tank snorted. Listen, I'm just trying to make the neighborhood better. You know, trim a few hedges, stop unsanctioned sheds, eliminate rogue statuary. Just civic stuff. Tank lowered his head again. Brent shrieked and bolted toward the house itself, leaping over a lawn gnome and crashing into the back patio furniture. He pulled himself under a glass table, panting, soaked, and shaking. This was not how HOA enforcement worked in the training videos. Mostly because there were no training videos. Mostly because no one expected an HOA officer to engage in tactical wildlife warfare. Meanwhile, neighbors were beginning to gather on the sidewalk outside, drawn by the screaming, the crashing, and the surreal sight of a clipboard flying over the fence. One neighbor began filming on her phone. Another sipped coffee and muttered, "I told y'all that man Eddie was hiding something." Inside the house, curtains fluttered. Eddie Salazar watched from a second-floor window with a faint sigh. His phone buzzed. An alert from Tank's Vestcam. He tapped to view the feed and winced as Brent tried to scale a trellis and was promptly yanked back down by his khakis. "He's not going to make it," Eddie said to no one. In the yard, Brent finally spotted salvation, a doghouse. He dove inside, knees jammed against plywood, breathing like a fugitive. Tank sniffed around the entrance, then did something chilling. He sat, just outside, waiting, watching. Brent tried his phone. Mud-soaked. Dead. His GoPro light blinked. The feed was still live. Somewhere, someone might be watching this horror. He briefly fantasized about winning a local Emmy for outstanding performance in suburban survival. Then something dawned on him. This wasn't just a violation citation anymore. This was war. And the Ram was winning.
Brent Malloy had never felt more like a prisoner of war than he did at that moment, crammed into a children's doghouse that smelled vaguely of beef jerky and despair. Every breath he took was filtered through the thick humidity of grass, shame, and his own sweat. Outside, the Ram known only as Tank remained posted like a sentient gargoyle. Every so often, Brent would hear a low grunt or the clatter of hooves as Tank adjusted his position. He was waiting. Brent could feel it. And it wasn't just about territory anymore. This had become something else. Personal. Tactical. Possibly spiritual. He tried not to make noise. He tried to control his breathing. But it was impossible. Every inch of him hurt, scraped elbows, bruised ribs, a possible concussion from the flamingo collision. He reached again for his walkie-talkie. Still dead. His phone? Waterlogged beyond hope. Even the backup citation slips in his vest pocket were shredded. His only remaining piece of gear was a dog whistle he had confiscated last summer from a kid using it to annoy joggers. Brent hadn't really tested it before. He didn't even know if it worked on rams. But at this point, hope was all he had. He slipped it out and gave it a soft, cautious tweak. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Instead of running away, Tank rose slowly, walked up to the doghouse, and headbutted the side hard enough to knock it 3 inches off the ground. Brent screamed, scooted further in, and dropped the whistle. Another impact. This time the walls cracked. Then, like some ancient god of suburban vengeance, Tank let out a bellow that echoed through the backyard and probably across several property lines. Back on the sidewalk, more neighbors had gathered. Some were filming. Others were just enjoying the show. One man set up a folding chair and pulled out a sandwich. "Is it weird I hope the Ram wins?" he asked aloud, to no one in particular. A teenage girl was live streaming to her followers. "You guys, I don't know what's happening, but some dude in a vest just got smoked by a giant goat. I think he might be dying. #Justice for him." Inside the house, Eddie Salazar made himself a cup of tea. He watched the feed from Tank's body cam on his tablet, occasionally wincing at the more humiliating parts. He admired Brent's resilience, if not his decision-making. Few men would choose to jump a 6-foot fence without knowing what was on the other side. Fewer would do it to issue a fine over lawn decor. Eddie considered intervening, but part of him was curious. He wanted to see how long the man would last. Brent, meanwhile, had had enough. He couldn't stay in the doghouse forever. Not just because his legs were cramping, but because his bladder was staging a quiet rebellion. He poked his head out, slowly, like a nervous meerkat. Tank was nowhere to be seen. That was somehow worse. He climbed out, moving in slow, exaggerated steps like he was trying not to wake a dragon. He crossed the lawn inch by inch, weaving between flower beds and tiki torches. His target, the gate. If he could make it back to the gate, he could climb over, roll into traffic if necessary, and never speak of this again. His heart pounded. Every step was agony. He could almost smell freedom. Then a soft bell chimed. A sprinkler near the gate rotated and locked onto him. Brent froze. The system clicked. Water hissed. Brent ran. Behind him, Tank emerged from the bushes like a horned assassin, launching into a full sprint. Brent screamed again, slipped on wet grass, and belly flopped into a patch of mulch. Tank trotted past him, made a sharp turn, and cut off his path to the gate. Brent lay on the ground, defeated. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, not in an HOA newsletters. Employee of the Month section. Just mulch and horns and internet humiliation. Then, in a flash of desperate inspiration, Brent turned and sprinted toward the tool shed. It was his only hope now. He dove inside, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. Darkness. Dust. The smell of gasoline and aged cardboard. He collapsed against the wall, heart pounding like a jackhammer on espresso. For a moment, there was silence. Tank headbutted the door. The whole shed rattled, but the latch held. Brent held his breath, waiting for the next hit. Nothing. Another few seconds passed. Still nothing. He allowed himself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, he'd won. Outside, Tank paced back and forth, head low, snorting in frustration. He had cornered trespassers before, but this one was slipperier than most. And louder. Tank scanned the yard, then slowly walked away. Inside the shed, Brent exhaled and slid to the floor. Okay, he muttered. New plan. Wait until dark. Then climb out, crawl home, fake a rabies diagnosis, and retire. But something didn't feel right. A whirring sound buzzed above him. He looked up. A small, red light blinked on a camera mounted in the corner. A pre-recorded voice played through a speaker. You are currently inside a restricted area. This shed is under surveillance. Please vacate immediately. Brent shook his head. Nope. No. This is my sanctuary now. Outside, the shed keypad beeped. Brent's eyes widened. What? The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Tank stood there, silhouetted by sunlight, calm and silent. Brent screamed again. He tried to leap over the workbench, knocking over tools and boxes in his panic. Tank entered the shed slowly, methodically, like a hitman. Brent tried to defend himself with a weed whacker. The cord snapped. He flung a bag of fertilizer. It exploded in a white puff. He backed into the shelves, sending a row of paint cans crashing down. It was chaos. Pure, mulch-covered, slapstick chaos. Outside, the crowd of neighbors gasped and cheered like it was a pay-per-view event. One elderly woman clapped enthusiastically. A man with binoculars gave a running commentary. He's going for the ladder. Nope, down he goes. Oof, right into the compost. Brent finally bolted from the shed, pants torn, shirt untucked, eyes wild with fear. He dove headfirst through the bushes and somehow, by some divine miracle, rolled back under the gate he had so boldly leapt over earlier that morning. He lay on the sidewalk, chest heaving, mud-streaked and shaking. The neighbors looked down at him in awe. Or pity. Or both. Across the fence, Tank stood proudly at attention. One bystander leaned in and whispered, Man, that goat is intense. Brent corrected him, voice hoarse. It's not a goat, it's a damn machine. And then he passed out cold. Brent Malloy woke up in a recliner that smelled faintly of cigars, motor oil, and some distant cousin of eucalyptus. His head pounded like a bass drum being played by a toddler, and his arms were wrapped in a crocheted blanket that felt suspiciously like it had seen a war. Sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, and the steady hum of an air purifier blended with the soft ticking of a wall clock. He blinked a few times, trying to piece together what had happened. Then it all hit him at once: Tank, the chase, the shed, the sprinkler that had betrayed him, the gate dive, the laughter of neighbors, the smell of compost and terror. he groaned. You're lucky he was in a good mood, a voice said from across the room. Brent turned his head and found himself face to face with Eddie Salazar, who was calmly slicing an apple with military precision. He wore jeans, a faded t-shirt, and an expression that hovered somewhere between curiosity and tired amusement. Brent tensed immediately, instinctively reaching for his vest, which was no longer on him. He sat up too fast and instantly regretted it as a wave of dizziness passed through his skull. Where am I? Brent asked. My living room, Eddie said, handing him a glass of water. You crawled back through my bushes, collapsed on my sidewalk, and passed out in front of 3 dozen people. One of them tried to give you CPR, but you screamed and rolled away. Brent muttered something incoherent, took the water, and sipped it slowly. He hated this. He hated being vulnerable. He hated being embarrassed. And most of all, he hated that Eddie wasn't even mocking him. That somehow made it worse. You shouldn't have jumped the gate, Eddie added. There's a reason I keep it locked. Brent, still reeling from the humiliation, tried to salvage some form of authority. You've got a weaponized ram in your yard. That's a public safety issue. You could be sued. Or arrested. Eddie sat across from him and raised an eyebrow. Only if anyone files a complaint. But so far, all I've heard is cheering and one elderly woman asking if she can hire Tank as her personal bodyguard. Brent narrowed his eyes. You trained that thing. It's not normal. Eddie leaned back, folding his arms. No. He's not. But he's also not what you think. Brent was silent for a beat. Then curiosity took over. So what is he? Eddie stared at him, then let out a breath and stood. He walked to a nearby cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a dusty binder. It had no label, just a government insignia that had been half blackened with a marker. He dropped it onto the coffee table with a soft thud. Classified project, he said. 19 years ago. Codename Operation Echo Horn. Funded by a military contractor who wanted to use animals for reconnaissance and non-lethal defense. We trained a group of animals, goats, dogs, even a couple of pigs. But Tank? Tank was the standout. Brent blinked. You're telling me that the government built an elite team of combat farm animals? Eddie shrugged. You're the one who got knocked out by one. Flipping open the binder, he showed Brent grainy black and white photos of Tank as a younger ram, wearing all sorts of gear, cameras, sensors, even what looked like a shock-absorbing saddle. There were charts, maps, behavioral studies, stress tests. One image showed a mock urban environment with Tank navigating obstacles like a pro athlete. He's not just strong, Eddie said. He's smart. Smarter than anyone realized. He learned commands, patterns, surveillance tactics. We used him for infiltration training. They said we'd replace half the tech with bio-alternatives within a decade. Brent skimmed through the pages, both horrified and fascinated. So why isn't he in some lab somewhere? Eddie's face hardened. Because the project got scrapped. Too many ethical concerns. Too much blowback when one of the pigs ended up inside a senator's golf cart mid-fundraiser. They shut it down, ordered the animals destroyed. I couldn't let that happen to Tank. Brent looked up sharply. You stole him? I liberated him, Eddie replied. They wanted to erase him. But he'd served his country. He deserved peace. So I took him and disappeared. Bought this house under an alias, laid low. And then what? Brent asked. You just turned him into a lawn ornament? Eddie cracked a smile. He prefers the term unofficial security detail. There was silence for a while. Brent processed the insanity of what he'd just heard. None of this fit into the clean, orderly rulebook he had clung to for years. It was like stepping into a different world. A world where HOA rules meant nothing, and rams wore armor and remembered combat strategies. He looked down at his hands. So what happens now? Eddie sipped his tea. That depends on you. Brent looked at him. You can walk out of here, pretend none of this ever happened, and go back to measuring lawn heights and issuing citations. Or, Eddie said, leaning forward, you can keep pushing. You can try to report me, expose this, make some kind of name for yourself. But I guarantee you, the moment you go public, you'll have more attention than you can handle. Not just from your HOA. From the people who buried this program in the first place. Brent swallowed. You threatening me? No, Eddie said. I'm telling you the truth. There are still people out there who don't want the public knowing what we did. And they'd love to use someone like you to clean up the loose ends, willingly or not. It wasn't a direct threat. It was worse. It was a glimpse into a much bigger game than Brent had ever imagined. He didn't know what to say. For the first time in his life, he realized the clipboard and citations didn't actually give him any real power. The system he believed in was just a surface. Beneath it was something murkier, messier, and far more dangerous. Eddie stood and went to the kitchen. You hungry? Brent stared at him. You're offering me food now? You almost got brained by a ram, Eddie said, opening the fridge. The least I can do is make you a sandwich. Brent rubbed his face. He was too tired to argue. And honestly, he was starving. What kind of sandwich? Turkey and Swiss, Eddie said. With mustard. No mayo. Tank hates the smell. Brent blinked. He has sandwich preferences? Eddie grinned. He's retired, not uncultured. As Eddie worked in the kitchen, Brent sat there in silence, overwhelmed and unsure of what came next. But one thing was certain. The world was not what he thought it was. And Tank was just the beginning. The video hit 6 million views before Brent had even finished his second turkey sandwich. It started with shaky Ring doorbell footage and ended with a slow-motion shot of him flailing through the bushes, smeared with mulch and fear, while Tank strutted behind him like a four-legged gladiator. By the time Brent left Eddie's house and checked his phone, revived with a bowl of rice and blind optimism, it was already too late. Hashtags were trending. Ram of Justice. Horned Hero. HOA Cop vs. Nature. Someone had remixed his scream into a techno beat. Another had animated Tank with glowing red eyes and laser horns. The internet had chosen sides, and it wasn't his. Brent sat in his car outside the community center parking lot, staring at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. He scrolled through comments, hoping for at least one defender, one person saying, "He was just doing his job." There were none. Even the HOA's official page had issued a lukewarm statement. We do not condone unauthorized entry onto private property. While we support all members of our enforcement team, we remind everyone to respect boundaries, literal and otherwise. Brent read it 3 times. The word support had never felt so empty. He started the car but didn't drive. He just sat there, gripping the wheel like it might float away if he didn't. People walked by on the sidewalk, some pointing, some snickering, a few lifting their phones. His face was now a meme. His name, trending for all the wrong reasons. And yet the thing that disturbed him most wasn't the mockery. It was the silence from the higher-ups. No one had called. Not the HOA president. Not the board members. Not even Debbie from the compliance committee, who once sent a group email because someone used the wrong trash bin. At home, the chaos had only just begun. Protesters arrived by afternoon. A group of teenagers set up a folding table outside Eddie's fence with a sign that read, "Free Tank." They handed out stickers shaped like horns. One man in a tie-dye shirt stood on a crate and delivered a passionate speech about animal rights, corporate surveillance, and the rise of ungulate resistance. By the time the local news showed up, it had morphed into something between a rally and a tailgate party. Someone grilled tofu burgers. A woman in a goat costume led chants. Eddie watched all of it from his window while sipping tea. Brent stood on the sidewalk across the street, wearing sunglasses and a hoodie like a man in witness protection. He felt like he'd lost control of the narrative, assuming he ever had it. He looked at Eddie's house. Peaceful. Fenced. Controlled. And inside a ram with more charisma than any HOA official ever dreamed of. Then came the press conference. The HOA president, Gerald Whitcomb, took the podium outside City Hall like he was announcing the capture of a foreign spy. Brent wasn't invited but watched the live stream from his car again, parked this time near a Taco Bell. Gerald was polished, calm, and profoundly insincere. "We understand that recent events in Willow Creek have raised questions regarding property rights, HOA protocols, and yes, even livestock," he began with a smile. "Let me assure you, we are conducting a full review." Brent leaned in closer. Gerald wasn't just downplaying the incident. He was spinning it. Painting Brent as a rogue agent who'd acted without authorization. A lone rule zealot. A man who'd crossed lines in pursuit of personal glory. Brent could barely breathe as he watched Gerald shake hands, smile for cameras, and subtly distance the HOA from everything he'd done. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel. Not because he had been thrown under the bus, but because they had no idea what was really happening. This wasn't just a bad decision caught on camera. This was the edge of something bigger. The binder, the training program, the shutdown military experiment. Brent had seen enough to know that this wasn't over. And if Tank got out, really out, someone could get hurt. Back at Eddie's, the crowd had swelled. The fence held for now. But there was tension in the air. Kids were climbing trees to get a look. Drones buzzed overhead. A man with a megaphone demanded Eddie bring Tank out, so we may judge his soul. Someone brought a bounce house. Inside, Eddie paced. He wasn't afraid, but he was annoyed. The whole point of this neighborhood was its quiet. That was why he'd chosen it. Bland, boring, invisible. Now there were microphones in the bushes and conspiracy podcasts camped out in minivans. He checked Tank's vest, battery full, camera stable. The ram lay in the corner, calm, chewing methodically on a pillow he had claimed 2 years ago. Eddie sat beside him. "We might have to move," he said softly. Tank snorted without looking up. Brent returned that night, after the crowd had thinned and the chants died down. He didn't knock this time. He just opened the back gates slowly and slipped inside. Eddie was already waiting, 2 mugs of coffee on the porch table. Brent sat down without speaking. "I got buried," he said eventually. "I saw," Eddie replied. "They called me a liability." "You are." Brent gave a dry laugh. "Yeah. Maybe. But you've got a sentient battering ram living in your backyard and now the internet is in love with him. How long do you think you can keep this under wraps?" Eddie didn't answer. He just sipped his coffee. Brent leaned in. "They don't care about me. They'll let this blow over. But you're holding a match over a pile of government secrets, and someone's going to notice." "I know," Eddie said quietly. Brent looked at him. "So what now?" Eddie stood, walked to a metal cabinet by the fence, and opened it. Inside were several hard drives, a radio scanner, and a small drone with military markings partially scraped off. He took out a file folder and handed it to Brent. Inside were photographs. A younger Eddie in uniform. Lab reports. Satellite images. And one photo of a yacht, white, sleek, and heavily guarded. "What is this?" Brent asked. "The real reason they shut us down," Eddie said. "Not because of ethics. Because we got too close to something they didn't want exposed. That yacht? It was supposed to be part of a donor party. Tank got loose during an op and picked up audio of the wrong people saying the wrong things." Brent flipped through the pages. "Blackmail?" "Insurance," Eddie said. "But I never used it. I kept it quiet. Retired. But now, with all this attention..." Brent nodded slowly. He understood. The circus outside wasn't just a distraction, it was a warning sign. The past was surfacing, and it wasn't going to stay buried. Then they both froze. A loud clang echoed from the backyard. Not the fence. Not the crowd. Something inside. They ran toward the source. The shed door was open. Tank was gone. The shed door swung gently in the night breeze, creaking with a soft rhythm that sounded too calm for what it revealed. Eddie stepped forward first, flashlight in hand, the beam sweeping across the cluttered space. Nothing. Just overturned buckets, a few cracked bags of feed, and a deep indentation in the soil where Tank had apparently launched himself into freedom. Brent stood behind him, silent, his mind trying to calculate what a rogue military-grade ram could do in a suburb full of startled civilians and viral expectations. The drone of distant voices still echoed faintly over the fence, late-night stragglers from the protest, TikTok influencers, curious neighbors, but inside the yard, it was quiet. Too quiet. Eddie didn't curse. He didn't shout. He just exhaled slowly and walked to a cabinet behind the house. He keyed in a code Brent hadn't noticed before, and the panel slid open, revealing what looked like a field kit from a spy movie. There were GPS trackers, encrypted tablets, tranquilizer darts, and a rolled-up tactical map of the entire neighborhood. "You have a war room," Brent muttered, not even surprised anymore. "I have a contingency," Eddie said. "Tank was never meant to be caged. If he's loose, he's not panicked, he's operating." "Operating?" Brent blinked. "He's not doing recon, Eddie, he's probably terrifying someone's chihuahua right now." Eddie ignored him and powered on the tablet. A map of Willow Creek appeared, overlaid with heat signatures and motion sensors. Brent stared in disbelief. "You've been tracking the whole neighborhood?" "Not people," Eddie said. "Tank. His vest has a tracker that pings every 60 seconds unless it's disabled. Which it was about 10 minutes ago." Brent felt his stomach drop. "So we have no idea where he is." "Not no idea," Eddie corrected. "Just enough of one to be worried." Within the hour, they were in Eddie's truck, a rusted beast that looked held together by duct tape and suspicion, cruising the quiet backroads of Willow Creek. Eddie drove without music, eyes flicking constantly between the road and his rearview mirrors. Brent sat stiffly in the passenger seat, holding the tranquilizer rifle like it was a rattlesnake. "Why would he leave?" Brent finally asked. "Because he remembers," Eddie said without looking over. "Tank's memory is photographic. Faces, sounds, smells. When the crowd showed up, it probably triggered something. He's not just reacting, he's tracking something." Brent didn't like the sound of that. "Tracking what?" Eddie hesitated. "The HOA gala is tomorrow night. On that yacht I showed you. Same one from the operation all those years ago." "You think Tank's going to crash a party?" Brent said, incredulous. "With what, a press pass and a smoke bomb?" "I think he's going to finish something that got interrupted a long time ago," Eddie replied. "And if he does it his way, people are going to get hurt. Maybe even die." Brent swallowed hard. For the first time, he saw Tank not as a humiliating force of slapstick vengeance, but as a loaded gun wandering through an unsuspecting world. They drove in silence for another few blocks before Eddie pulled into an alley behind the strip mall near the highway. "He was here 2 minutes ago," Eddie said, pointing to a scorched heat signature on the tablet. Brent peered out the window. "Why would a combat ram visit a strip mall?" The answer came before Eddie could reply. From behind the dumpster, a girl in a hoodie with a camera rig emerged and waved frantically. "I saw him!" she shouted, nearly tripping over her oversized boots. "He went that way, toward the skate park. He took out a guy on a scooter." Brent blinked. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Lacey," she said breathlessly. "I run the Mystery of the Month channel on YouTube. I've been live streaming your ram all day. He's trending higher than cryptids and former child stars. Do you want a mic?" "No," Brent and Eddie said in unison. But Lacey was already filming, narrating in real time. "Ladies and gents, it looks like we're going mobile. I've joined forces with the HOA vigilante and the man who may or may not be a secret government agent. Our goal, capture Tank the tactical ram before he levels another PDA meeting." They had no choice but to let her follow. She was oddly resourceful and disturbingly accurate. She knew alley paths, side routes, and shortcuts through the subdivision. She even had a drone of her own, which she launched from her backpack mid-sprint. At the skate park, Brent found the injured scooter guy sitting on a bench, holding his ribs and looking dazed. "It came out of nowhere," he muttered. "Like a furry torpedo with horns. I think it saluted me." They were getting closer. By nightfall, the trio stood at the edge of the marina, staring at the gently bobbing yacht where the gala would be held the next evening. It was massive, white, and covered in string lights and smug anticipation. Security guards patrolled the deck. Brent adjusted the tranq rifle strap over his shoulder. "He'll come here," Eddie said. "This is where they silence the data, shut down the project. Tank won't forget the smells, the voices, the yacht itself. This is where it ends for him." "And what if he doesn't care about finishing anything?" Brent asked. "What if he's just angry and confused and decides to head at someone off the bow?" "Then we stop him," Eddie said. "But not by force unless we have to." "I'd rather not put him down," Lacey chimed in. "What if you don't have to stop him at all? What if we let him expose the truth? Let him be the whistleblower?" Brent stared at her. "He's a ram. He doesn't talk. But he's got a vest," she replied. "And that vest has a camera. If he can get close to those people again, to the same yacht, maybe he triggers something. An autorecord, a memory sequence, whatever military rams do. Maybe that's all he wants." Eddie didn't dismiss the idea. Tank was out there. Somewhere. Maybe watching them. Maybe already inside. The night wind shifted slightly. Distantly, they heard something, a faint echo of hooves on dockwood. They turned toward the sound slowly. And then they saw him. Standing perfectly still at the far end of the dock, half-shadowed, facing the yacht. Not charging. Not panicking. Waiting. The war ram had found his battlefield. And the mission wasn't over yet. The gala shimmered like a floating dream, suspended between artificial glamour and tightly wound paranoia. String lights glittered across the polished deck of the yacht, champagne glasses clinked in choreographed rhythm, and jazz hummed over speakers with all the soul of a tax seminar. The upper crust of Willow Creek's HOA leadership mingled under the stars, blissfully unaware that a tactical ram was somewhere nearby with unfinished business. Brent adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of a decorative lifebuoy and sighed. He hadn't been invited, of course. No one invited the guy who became internet famous for getting flattened by livestock. But tonight wasn't about redemption or reputation. It was about stopping a catastrophe before it dressed itself up as justice. Beside him, Eddie looked surprisingly comfortable in his pressed shirt and unassuming blazer. He carried himself like someone used to infiltration, like this sort of party was just another mission with better hors d'oeuvres. Lacey, meanwhile, had disguised herself as a catering assistant and was currently ferrying canapes through the crowd with a camera hidden in her tray and a GoPro mounted in a floral hair clip. Brent still wasn't sure how she got past security, but she'd insisted on coming. "History doesn't just happen," she'd said. "You film it." The plan was simple in theory and maddeningly fragile in practice. Tank had been spotted entering the dockyard perimeter an hour ago, moving low and deliberate. He was no longer a wild animal on the run. He was a ghost, disciplined, patient, and terrifyingly focused. If their timing was right, Tank would make his entrance during the honorary speech by HOA President Gerald Whitcomb, the very man Eddie claimed was at the center of the buried military project. And if the encrypted footage stored on Tank's vest cam was still intact, it would be triggered by proximity to the same yacht from years ago. Everything was set. Now it just needed to not fall apart. Brent scanned the crowd. Whitcomb stood near the bar, holding court as usual, flanked by security and leaning into every conversation like he was the most important man in 3 counties. Brent watched him raise a glass, saw the smug smile that had haunted board meetings for years, and wondered how many secrets that man had paved over with landscaping ordinances and budget line items. The lights dimmed slightly as the band paused, and a clear tone rang out over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the MC, "please welcome the reason our community thrives, the man who's built more bylaws than anyone alive, President Gerald Whitcomb." Applause broke out in an uneven wave as Gerald took the mic and cleared his throat with theatrical gravitas. Brent looked at Eddie, who nodded once. Lacey gave a tiny thumbs up from across the deck. Somewhere beyond the guardrails, in the darkness beyond the marina lights, the faintest shuffle of hooves echoed. Gerald's speech began predictably, stats about lawn violations decreasing, some bragging about recycling compliance, a metaphor comparing neighborhood unity to synchronized sprinklers. But then he pivoted. The tone sharpened. He addressed the recent controversy. "We've seen a surge of misinformation and misplaced enthusiasm surrounding a certain animal," Gerald said with a calculated smile. "Let me assure you all, there's no conspiracy, no military project, and certainly no rogue ram wandering the streets of Willow Creek." As if summoned by arrogance alone, Tank appeared at the edge of the dock. Silent. Composed. Every head turned in disbelief. Conversation stopped. Even the jazz band faltered. Tank stood framed in the yacht's spotlight, looking like a knight made of muscle and legend. Brent whispered, "Show time." Tank moved forward. Not a charge, but a deliberate march. The crowd parted instinctively, creating an aisle without realizing it. Gerald froze at the mic, color draining from his face. He started to say something, an order, a command, but Tank kept walking. The moment stretched, strange and almost sacred. Lacey's camera captured every angle. Then, as Tank reached the center of the deck, a sharp beep emitted from his vest. A small green light pulsed. Eddie's eyes widened. The auto trigger. The proximity signal had activated the data retrieval process. Everyone stared as the vest projected a shaky, grainy video onto the nearest sail, a hidden recording from years ago. A younger Gerald stood on the same yacht, laughing with men in suits, discussing surveillance trials, off-the-books operations, animalized intelligence assets. It was damning, raw, and utterly real. Chaos erupted. The guests shouted, security guards lunged forward, but no one touched the ram. Not yet. Gerald scrambled to the mic again, voice high and brittle. "This is a hoax. It's doctored. He's just a goat with a projector. He's a ram," Brent said aloud. "And he remembers everything." Reporters swarmed. Phones recorded. The internet, already halfway obsessed with the myth of Tank, now had the final piece of the story. Eddie stepped forward beside the ram, holding up his hands. "This animal served his country," he said calmly, "and was betrayed by it. He deserves more than backyard exile. He deserves the truth to be heard." Gerald snapped, barking orders to the guards, but it was too late. The footage was online within minutes. Uploaded by Lacey. Clipped, captioned, distributed. By the time Gerald's security team tried to cut the feed, it was already being shared by senators, journalists, and former project whistleblowers. Tank stood still, as if knowing his work was done. And then, of course, someone panicked. A security guard made a grab. Tank's instincts flared. He launched into motion, not toward Gerald, but toward the guard. One clean hit to the knee sent the man flying into a decorative fountain. The crowd screamed, half in fear, half in delight. Brent ran forward, rifle in hand, unsure if he was there to protect the ram, or the humans. Eddie raised a hand to stop him. "Let him go," he said. Tank didn't attack again. He turned calmly, and walked off the deck. Down the ramp. Back onto the dock. No one tried to stop him. The silence was thunderous. Brent stood motionless, watching the creature disappear into the shadows, his mission complete. No one clapped. No one cheered. Not yet. But the air shifted. Something had cracked. Something old and dishonest. 2 hours later, Gerald was no longer president. By morning, the yacht was under federal investigation. Eddie disappeared without saying goodbye. Lacey was signed by a podcast network. And Brent Malloy? He was offered his job back, this time with a Rio badge. He declined. Weeks passed. The neighborhood calmed. Protesters left. Memes slowed. But every once in a while, someone swore they saw Tank on a hillside, silhouetted at dawn. Watching. And somewhere, in a peaceful corner of the world, a retired war ram slept under open skies, far from gates and fences, knowing the truth had found its way home.